Good morning, everyone. Hope you're doing well today. We're going to go ahead and get started. If you haven't already done so, please take a minute to drop your name in the chat and tell us what campus you're from. If you don't know me, I'm Krista Kamer. I'm the director of CSU Coast. I'm having trouble with my slides. Okay, what is going on? There we go. I'm the director of CSU Coast, the Council on Ocean Affairs, Science and Technology. And here is our lineup for today. We've got a number of folks with us from throughout the CSU. And actually, before we get started, I want to take a minute to thank the staff of both CSU-WATER and CSU Coast for all of their work behind the scenes to make today possible. I think most of us know that we wouldn't be where we are without some help and support from others. So if you're not familiar with CSU Coast or CSU-WATER, we're both system-wide water-oriented STEM affinity groups within the CSU. Coast is the system-wide network for ocean and coastal research, education, and workforce development. And our members address critical marine and coastal issues and inform policy development, decision-making, and sustainable stewardship. The CSU-WATER group is really a re-envisioning of the former Water Resources and Policy Initiatives group, which was known as WRPI. CSU-WATER aims to develop academic and community partnerships to create public awareness and broad support to address water issues. Every molecule of water needs to work harder. So Jamie Nitel from Sacramento State is really the inspiration behind today's webinar. Jamie is a Fulbright ambassador, and as such, he asked us, Steve Blumenshine from CSU-WATER and I, to help put together a webinar to reach out to CSU faculty. So Jamie's goals are to attract more CSU faculty and more diverse faculty members to apply to the Fulbright Scholar Program. He'll tell you much more about the benefits of the program, but briefly, Fulbright scholarships provide really great opportunities for faculty development, which in turn enriches the educational experiences for our students. The Fulbright Scholarship is also well aligned with the values of the CSU. So our goals for the webinar are to increase awareness of the program, provide insight to you on what makes for a competitive application, explain the different steps in the process, and ultimately inspire you to apply to the program. Today, our speakers will cover the program in general, highlighting important points, steps you need to take to plan and develop a successful application, how to navigate the application process, and some of their personal experiences. So I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists today, and then I'm going to turn it over to Steve Blumenshine from CSU-WATER to introduce our guest from the Chancellor's Office. So all of today's panelists are former Fulbright scholars. First, we'll hear from Jamie Nitel, the Fulbright ambassador. Jamie is a professor and chair of the biology department at Sacramento State. He did his undergraduate work at UC Santa Cruz and his master's at California State at CSU Northridge, and he did his PhD at Florida State. Jamie's an ecologist, and he focuses on how environmental variation affects the biodiversity and functionality of seasonal wetlands. Jamie was a Fulbright scholar in 2017-2018 and spent time in Israel and Morocco. After that, we'll hear from Ritin Bhaduri, Associate Professor of Biological Sciences at Stanislaus State. Ritin got his PhD at George Washington University, and he studies the ecology, behavior, and parasitism of crustaceans. Recently, his work has involved the detection, extraction, and characterization of microplastics in sediment, water, and organisms. Ritin just finished his Fulbright experience in India, and he'll tell you all about that. Our third panelist is Steve Blumenshine, who is currently the interim executive director of CSU-WATER. Prior to his current position, Steve was the director of the Research and Education Division at the California Water Institute at CSU Fresno, where he's also been a faculty member for 20 years. Steve did his undergraduate work at University of Wisconsin, his master's at George Mason University, and his PhD at Notre Dame. His research focuses primarily on freshwater and anadromous fish and aquatic ecology. Steve has had 2 Fulbrights, which he'll tell you about today. He was in Thailand 14 years ago, and he was in Germany last year. And our last speaker is Dr. Cheryl Logan, professor of marine science at CSU Monterey Bay. Cheryl did her undergraduate degree at Berkeley and her PhD at Stanford. Her work focuses on the physiological mechanisms that marine animals use to survive in their environments, with a significant focus on climate change-induced effects. She specifically looks at the effects of temperature, hypoxia, and ocean acidification. Cheryl was a Fulbright Scholar in 2019 and spent time in the Galapagos. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve Blumenschein from CSU-WATER to introduce our next speaker.
Thanks,
Steve?
Krista. I'm pleased to introduce Shankar Raman, the current director of CSU IP programs. And overall, I want to include here the past director, Leo Van Cleve. And I worked with Leo over a number of years, more closely with Shankar and Leo together. But Leo was really the spur for my second Fulbright in Germany. But I'd like Dr. Raman to talk a bit about IP programs and their very impressive results that they have.
Thank you, Steve. Good morning, everybody. Krista and Steve, thank you so much for including me in this conversation. I'm really happy to be part of this and quite excited to have this conversation. So my role here in the Chancellor's Office, I've been here 3 years. I direct international programs, which is a system-wide study abroad program that was set up in 1963 by the Board of Trustees. In that capacity, I run programs in 18 different countries with about 60 different university partners. Most of our programs are one-year study abroad, with language acquisition being part of that program. And just in the pandemic, we started also adding some semester programs as well. The important thing that I want to share with you here is that in this time frame, we have had about nearly 25,000 CSU students who have gone and studied abroad with our programs. And it's one of the most affordable study abroad experiences that we have anywhere in the country, and certainly within the system. Part of what I also want to share is that these students who go there, talk about how this is a life-changing experience. A lot of our students end up coming from first-gen backgrounds. Many of them come from Pell recipients and so on. So this is a truly transformative experience. But when they come back, one of the things that they ask is, what else can I do? How do I get back out there? And one of the options that we do talk about is the Fulbright on the student side. So what you're going to hear today certainly is about the Fulbright as how you can participate in it as a faculty member. But certainly, there are student Fulbright opportunities as well. I saw in one of the earlier slides where, Jamie, you were being introduced and you talked about how this can impact your classrooms and your students as faculty get their Fulbrights. And I think that that's something that is an invaluable experience for our students to know that CSU faculty who do research can also then have their students participate in it and then look for their own opportunities as well. So I encourage you to kind of take advantage of these incredible scholars here on this panel who are fantastic resources and are generous with their time to talk to you all about this. The CSU students have a very long history of applying for Fulbright. So I just went to kind of take a look at some things. Over the last 20 years, we've had about 160 plus CSU students who have been Fulbright recipients. That's a very important accomplishment, and especially the last decade, that number has increased about 50%. CSU students are coming from all different campuses when they are applying for this. There are certainly some campuses that seem to have a lot more students who have gone through the Fulbright application process, which, by the way, is a fairly involved process. So, I would encourage you to seek out faculty who do this to help their students. I did that in my previous institution. helping prepare students for their interviews, for their proposals. And it's an amazing experience for these students. Our students have ended up in 62 different countries with their Fulbrights, with the most common ones such as Germany, South Korea, Spain, Mexico. But they've also gone to countries like Bahrain and Syria, Azerbaijan, Ecuador. So they are doing incredible things with their Fulbright awards. They are also coming from 36 different majors. So this is not just saying that, oh, Fulbright is either for the humanities or somebody who's teaching English in another country. There are lots of sciences. There's a lot of public health. There's a lot of biology students that are doing this as well. So, so keep that in mind as you hear this information today, because your students certainly benefit from the experiences that you gathered through your Fulbright, and your advice to them as they apply for their Fulbright will be much appreciated. I think that this is something that I want to kind of leave you with, in that this is, the work that I do in terms of study abroad is certainly, documented as being life-changing. But I can tell you that the students that I advised who ended up in Fulbrights have seen their life transform. It's an elite cohort of students, and the Institute of International Education makes sure that they're part of this eclectic, highly selective group. So they, you're setting them up on a path to sort of progress, where they will be doing things in terms of graduate school or further research. So I think that this is something that you would find very gratifying as faculty members, to see your students kind of go through that program as well. I'm going to be here, and I'm looking forward to this conversation, but I'm happy to answer questions as they come along. But I'll hand it back to Krista and Steve. But really, thank you so much for including me in this.
Thank you so much, Shankar, for those words and for sharing this event with us.
Yes, thank you. All right, we're going to go to Jamie Nitel, our first speaker. Jamie, take it away.
All right. Whoops. Okay, is my mute off?
Yeah, you're all good.
That's always a good start. Yeah, well, I first want to thank Krista and Steve and all of their staff for really making all of this happen with the organization and infrastructure in creating today's webinar. I really appreciate it. And it's really a great pleasure for me to participate in this. Some of this has already been pointed out, kind of my background. I'm up here at Sac State. My Fulbright Scholar Award was 2017, 2018, where I spent almost 8 months in Israel at the University of Haifa. My Fulbright Award was both research and teaching. I taught a graduate level course on community ecology there. But most of the time was spent doing research, looking at kind of the parallels of the ecology of seasonal wetlands both here in California and in Israel, both Mediterranean climates, and try to better understand the ecology of these systems as well as conservation. I just want to first start off with an overview. Just touching on some of the topics that both me and our panel will be covering today. And all of us will be covering on different aspects of this overview, including why we applied, how we approached the application, what we did on the Fulbright, of course, the impact on all these different levels, the professional, institution, and personal. And I will also touch on, at the end, starting your Fulbright journey and talking about other Fulbright opportunities that go beyond these typical scholar awards that we think about. So I'll start off with how I approached the application. I kind of had a different route to the Fulbright program. I originally, probably a dozen years ago, I mentored a a Fulbright master's student from Columbia here at Sac State, and through her master's. And after that, I really didn't think that the Fulbright was for me. Like I didn't think that I was competitive. I thought I always had this, bias that it was people from R1 institutions and elite, researchers who do it. But my host was somebody I knew since graduate school, because we had quite a bit of overlap in our research interests, and we were talking about different funding to begin a collaboration, and he suggested going the Fulbright route, and that's when I first started exploring with the Fulbright program. And so I had this host, and I began to work with both him, Leon Blaustein, and the department and university on the terms, which started off as a research proposal, turned into research and teaching, since the department really wanted me to teach a course, and I was happy to do so. It was really a great opportunity. The other thing how I approached this was I wanted to plan this to coincide with a sabbatical leave. And I have an asterisk here because it's really, really important to give yourself enough time in the planning and really having a timeline that will allow you to be able to both apply for the Fulbright program and your sabbatical, to try and coincide the two. It can be tricky, but it's very doable. The other thing I wanted to mention was, once I got there, there were other opportunities that arose, including these regional travel grant awards. And so I applied for one and received that, which supported me going to Morocco to begin another collaboration with folks there. I'm not going to go into all the detail of what I did during my Fulbright experience. It's quite extensive. I'm happy to share that later. But I want to jump into the professional impacts and the various other impacts that the Fulbright had on me. From a professional perspective, the Fulbright really expanded my perspectives in my field of wetland ecology, freshwater ecology, and conservation, by giving me this more global view of these systems, and getting the experience of interacting with other researchers from around the world. The other thing that this impacted me professionally was the international collaborations I started. Out of the research I did during this time, I published 4 papers and gave a number of conference talks and community talks back here in California, but also while I was there, I gave departmental seminars and so forth throughout the country. And one of the great things that was alluded to earlier was using the research and a lot of the cultural examples from my experiences and bringing those into the classroom upon my return. And for example, I taught for the first time this Plants and Civilization course, which worked out perfectly in bringing in a lot of these experiences that I had and examples from some of the places I was at. The personal impact was also great. I brought my whole family. I had 2 teenagers. It was transformative for all of us. We with the traveling together, the bonding, like all of us being out of our comfort zones and just exploring the world together. It was really just an incredible experience. It also expanded all of our understandings of these new cultures throughout the world, which was also just incredibly enriching. But ultimately, the greatest theme, I think, and this this goes through the professional and personal aspect, is the relationships that we started during this experience, and to this day still have relationships with people, really great friends and colleagues throughout the world, and which is just has been priceless. Okay, so starting your Fulbright journey. So, you know, one of the great ways to start, if you're starting from scratch and not really knowing where to begin, you know, my first suggestion is to go to the website, the Fulbright Scholar website, and just tool around for a couple hours. You know, you can avoid doing grading and just explore what it has to offer, all the different kinds of awards, what are the past awards that have been done, and also I highly recommend registering your interest to receive newsletters. They're incredibly informative. They provide lots of great information, including webinars that they put on. And some of those webinars are really fantastic. I've done a couple. And for example, one of them was focused on countries throughout the world that really didn't have many applications going to them. And so there are a lot of really places throughout the world that really could use, you know, faculty coming from here, but also you can also start collaborations with places in the world and people from places in the world where, you know, they aren't getting much of the interaction, and so so check those out, and then you can also begin by making contacts abroad for an invitation letter, so you can start reaching out to people that you may know, or which is a good foot up, but also people you may not know. You can kind of start a conversation or collaboration by seeing whether there's any interest to hosting you. Another thing you can do is contacting alumni in the Scholar Directory, and then start your application. Now, we just had the deadline for the application, but which was September 15th, but that gives you, the good news is that you have, you know, a nice year now to start getting this ball rolling if you're indeed interested, to try and make next year's deadline. There are many other Fulbright awards as well, beyond just the Scholar Award. There's a Fulbright Specialist Program where you can register your interests and specialties, and those are much shorter. They can be a couple weeks, they can be a month, and you can go teach somewhere. There are also administrative awards, distinguished scholar awards, and so forth, and very specific programs too that you may fall in. And another option you can think about is hosting a Fulbright Scholar from abroad. And there are several programs that fall under that category, including the SIR program, also a lecturing fund, and a TA program as well. So, so here are just some links where you can follow the Fulbright program, an email for reaching out to them, as well as their websites. And of course, there's the panel, who is also a great resource. So what I just presented is a very abbreviated version of my presentation I would typically give, but I'd be happy to engage with your department, your college, your university in more depth if you're interested. And then you can reach out to me for discussing next steps, to look at you know, some of my proposal examples, as well as I'd be happy to take a look at your proposal and help you develop a proposal. And furthermore, not only kind of the pre-proposal stage, but post-proposal. And so if you end up receiving an award, I can also be a resource in kind of planning your trip and kind of making the most out of it. Anyways, thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Jamie. Fabulous. And just, if you missed it in the chat, all of the slides from today's speakers, we'll make those available after today's webinar along with the recording. Next up is Dr. Ritin Bhaduri from Stanislaus State. Please take it away.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ritin. I will be sharing my screen. I have pre-recorded my presentation in which I have shared my personal experiences for the grant, what I did to apply for my grant, and my post-award experiences. Hope you will find the presentation helpful. Greetings, everyone. I'm Ritin Bhaduri from California State University, Stanislaus. It's great that you're interested in the Fulbright program. As a recent grantee, I'm happy to share my personal experiences with you. I completed my program just last month, spending this past spring and summer working on a research project in the Western Himalayan mountains in India. In this brief presentation, I would like to provide personal insights into my early preparation, networking and submission of the application, and overall post-award experiences. It's never too early to start thinking about applying to the Fulbright program. Even though I knew about this program for a very long time, I never thought about applying for this competitive award grant until I gained tenure at my institution. I have always been attracted to the mighty Himalayan mountains and wanted to visit, even work there. Of the many research projects that I've been involved in over the past several years, I decided to consider one for a potential project of environmental relevance in that part of the world. While doing research, especially literature review, I came across a review paper written by a scientist there. I emailed him about my interest and possible collaboration. To my great surprise, he expressed interest in my proposed work. That's when I decided to apply for the Fulbright Award. We emailed each other several times and jointly developed a working proposal. Even though the letter of invitation was optional, I requested one. And as expected, my host wrote a strong letter, which I believe further supported my application. I started the application process several months in advance before the submission deadline in mid-September. It is important to read the program description carefully, which will help you to judge whether you're a good fit for that particular award. You will have different options of positions as similar awards are available in multiple countries. I had multiple questions during the application process and contacted the program officer, who was very helpful. Fulbright maintains a directory of past grantees, so I contacted a few of them as well. I have also received several messages from other CSU colleagues and expect to hear from others down the road. I will gladly respond to any questions to the best of my ability. While writing the proposal, researching on the topics, significance, the feasibility of the project's completion, and its outcome all can lead to a strong proposal. I had 2 experts critique my proposal, which was incredibly helpful. I had to submit letters of recommendations. For that, I made sure I asked my colleagues who were familiar with my professional preparation and personal attributes. It is critical you get the strongest letters possible as part of your application. Personally, I waived my rights to the letters, and I fully trusted my referees to provide a fair assessment of my accomplishments. Considering how competitive the awards are, I maintained positivity as much as possible. I kept an open mind and had decided on applying again in case I didn't succeed during the current cycle. After all, subsequent applications are almost always stronger for most applicants. In April 2021, I received notification that my application was successful and I was one of the award recipients. I was elated by the news, but had little to celebrate because of the ongoing COVID pandemic. Even then, I shared the news with my foreign collaborators, university administrators, department colleagues, friends, and family. I spent several months preparing for my trip. While leaving the US, I thought I might have packed a lot more stuff that I actually needed. But after reaching my destination, I realized I should have traveled light, as all essential items were available and that too at a reasonable cost. My initial weeks were challenging, as one would expect in a foreign country, while being out of my comfort zone. My emotions ranged from feeling awesome to borderline terrified during certain times. I made every effort to be as accommodating as possible, whether it was for banking, housing needs, local transportation, and other aspects. Building a social presence was vital, as many gracious citizens helped me to overcome the initial challenges. Ambitious research projects like ours was bound to change shape and direction, so I recognized the challenges and adapted to the unforeseen circumstances. They involved traveling to another institution, which was over 100 miles away from the host city. I spent several weeks on the project at that institution. Without such flexibility, it would have been impossible for me to carry out my project. This is River Bayes, and here I am with 2 student assistants collecting water samples. I also spent part of my visit traveling to nearby places, interacting with native folks, learning and appreciating new cultures, trying different cuisines, and had a highly enjoyable experience. This was my first visit to the Himalayas. The terrain was spectacular, but was difficult to navigate. No matter the place, I would encourage everyone to apply to the Fulbright program. You will get to travel, experience new culture, meet new people, make lasting connections, all while being paid by the Fulbright grant. I wish you the best of luck, and thank you for attending the Fulbright webinar. Greetings, everyone.
Thank you, Ritten. Fabulous.
Thank you, Krista.
Our next speaker is Dr. Steve Blumenschein.
Thanks,
who's also
Krista.
our co-host.
Can you see this okay?
Yes, looks good.
So I want to give a public service announcement and build on a point made by Shankar Raman of International Programs to tout the CSU and their presence in Fulbright for faculty. So here we have some data from the Fulbright program from 2021, Fulbright leaders that are of universities and colleges that are HSI, Hispanic Serving Institutions, and look on the right column, Master's Institution, what do we see? California State is at least half or more. So keep it up, everybody. Okay, back to our regularly scheduled program. So I'm Steve Blumenschein, Interim Executive Director of CSU-WATER. And over on the right, I offer some pictures of my 2 Fulbright experiences, first one in Thailand, and then in Germany, 2 different continents and about 15 years apart. So I just made some quick bullet points overview of my interaction with Fulbright. So like in the Q&A, for example, I could take some of the questions from the review panel side. So I've been serving on 6 review panels of various types: country, region, subject, student, foreign scholar. There's a new journal called Fulbright Chronicles that's in about its 3rd or 4th issue. So I have a paper overviewing some of these Fulbright experiences in that journal coming out. And then I do some symposia for International Week here at CSU Fresno over the last couple of years. And then I have warm and productive engagement with CSU International programs with Shankar and Leo, which has been very rewarding and insightful in learning about the impressive work that they do. So like Ritin mentioned, and Jamie as well, I think a highlight here, actually, I mean, we come down to it, you get paid to travel to really interesting places and you can make new friends. So I chose these pictures which kind of encapsulate the spirit of the place where I did my Fulbright. So in Thailand, Thailand, the national motto is Land of Smiles. So you can see that here in these school children. We're very happy to get out of the classroom, I think, but everywhere you go, people are smiling and helpful and very engaging. And on the right is one of my research hosts in Germany. And what you see there is the very well-known kind of German meat grill. This was my going away party here at that institution. I don't know if they were celebrating my time there or my going away, but we had a great time, of course, with beer and cabbage and lots of meat. Typical German experience. Then also, I think each of the panelists will touch on this, bring the family. There we are in Bangkok, Thailand. So this was a while ago. Our oldest daughter on the right, Dixie, she's now a 2nd-year student in med school at UCSF. And our daughter in the middle, Gemma, there's a picture of Gemma coming up here. There's our son. He is studying music at Orange Coast College. And our daughter, Gemma, there, holding that snake very bravely. No wonder, she's in animal science at Cal Poly, just finishing that program up there. So how to get started? We each are going to talk on this a little bit in the panel. I want to share my pretty unique experiences. So in Thailand, I was just newly tenured faculty member and I did have sabbatical. Some people are asking about how to combine or whether to combine Fulbright with sabbatical. We could talk about that more. I have another point on that coming up. This was kind of a traditional Fulbright in that I was hosted by one university over 6 months. And I see in the Q&A, by the way, each program, each country program has a different agreement with Fulbright and the State Department. So the durations and the timing of the appointments vary. It's not going to be one size fits all. It's typically going to be in the academic year cycle of that host country. So you got to be flexible. Then much more challenging. I wouldn't suggest this as a first time go around. In Germany, I had 3 hosts, 2 universities and 1 government research office over just 2.5 months. And then I had a week in Switzerland to finish up a project with a colleague there. So overall, the question about the timing of this, first, of course, try to do this with a sabbatical like Jamie suggested, or a difference in pay leave. There's a lot of creativity here. And the timing I just spoke to, it's going to be based on the host country academic year usually. But what I did in my first sabbatical for Thailand, I provided options A and B. In other words, I did a sabbatical proposal. If I get the Fulbright, I'm taking the full year at half pay. If I don't get the Fulbright, I'll go for just like 1 semester at the full pay and we'll go from there. So I gave my dean and the sabbatical review committee options A, option B, because the Fulbright proposal would not be resolved by the time of the sabbatical decisions. This point came up last, sorry about the order, but seek backup funding, that actually goes to the options A and B, because don't forget that you're offering yourself as a free researcher or teacher. Maybe that country or that institution should have some skin in the game in supporting what you're contributing to them for free, essentially. So how to make these connections? I saw in the Q&A is what if you don't have a partner abroad? This is where you got to sharpen up your networking game, everybody. So when you go to conferences or even CSU things like the CSU Coast meeting is coming up in Long Beach next month. Start networking because somebody knows somebody every in the world, right, Shankar? I mean, you never know who knows somebody, and then you make an introduction, you have a new friend, and then there you are, you're on this panel next year. So get up your marketing and PR game, what you can offer as a Fulbright scholar abroad, and pick your country carefully. The program managers will not tell you the acceptance rate. So it is kind of a roll of the dice. If I knew what I knew now, what I was told after the fact, I'm not sure I would have applied to Germany. So the message there was that Northern and Central Europe, for example, are very competitive, as is Australia, I'm told. And then in the proposal, it's not your typical research proposal like the NSF or NIH or USDA or something like that. It is as much about you as the project. Don't be shy. Pitch you and what you bring to this and what you bring back to your host institution, especially the students. So you have to PR yourself unabashedly. So for example, invitation letters were mentioned. Get some official ones. So for Germany, I had to have 3 because I had 3 hosts. So get something official on letterhead. Give them plenty of time to produce this because they're going to be very busy, active researchers. And for reference letters, I suggest internal and external. So on the reviewer side, if you have, for example, your chair, your dean, and then maybe your PhD friend or colleague who's at another university, okay, that's great, but I would suggest getting an external one. So I had a colleague who's known me for, what does she say, 24 years. She's with National Marine Fisheries Service and a well-regarded researcher in her own right. So mix it up a little bit with academic and non-academic research testaments. And then the proposal, I made the point about it's not only you, but the project and make it a bit personal. So for this one, for example, the bottom, I highlighted that my paternal family side came from Baden-Württemberg, the area where I did my Fulbright, and I have that family history way back. So I have kind of a personal family connection to where I'm asking them to pay for me to go. I'm trying to advance, but okay. Let me make sure I didn't, okay. Sorry about that, I had a blip there. And this is just a highlight slide from the project I was working in Germany and Lake Constance. So when you're planning the research, find these potential collaborators and discuss with them or read the literature from the system you're going to. What are the gaps that you could fill? For example, I had some things in my research toolbox that they were lacking, so it was a good fit. And then what can you offer them as a free researcher? And you want to do that before they write the letters for you. So from the reviewer perspective, make sure you have a tractable project, that it's realistic. And can you and your host do the project? It's not just you on your own, it's a team effort. And then describe some benefits. There's a section in the proposal about this. And what do you bring home? And then there was a commentary in Nature that came out recently is how to gain competitive edge in grant writing. And to that end, I'm willing to share my most recent Fulbright proposal to Germany, where I had the 3 hosts over a short period of time. So that about covers it. So I'm open to questions, or if you want to take a look at that proposal, I'm willing to share that. And I think that's all I had. Thanks, Krista.
Great, thank you, Steve. We are pretty much on schedule. Great job, you guys. Our last speaker is Dr. Cheryl Logan from CSU Monterey Bay. And just so you know, continue to put your questions in the Q&A. We have a lot of them coming up, and we will get to those right after Cheryl is done. So Cheryl, please go ahead.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Really happy to be here and share my experiences. It's also really fun to be on this panel and hear about other Fulbright experiences in other countries. So as Krista said earlier, I'm a professor in the Department of Marine Science at Cal State Monterey Bay. And get my, there we go. So I was a research and teaching scholar to Ecuador for a 5-month period in 2019 prior to the pandemic, fortunately. And my host institution was the Universidad San Francisco de Quito, or USFQ, which is on the mainland. However, I was actually based at the Galapagos Science Center in the Galapagos Islands, which is about 1,000 kilometers off the coast of Ecuador. And I was living with my family on San Cristobal Island, which is one of about 14 major islands in the Galapagos archipelago. And my research project was entitled Galapagos Corals, Canaries in the Coal Mine. So I'll tell you a little bit more in a couple slides about why I chose the Galapagos and how I developed this project. But first, I just wanted to share some of the iconic wildlife that made me interested in going to the Galapagos in the first place. So even though I'm a marine scientist, the terrestrial wildlife there is incredible. So we got to see the giant tortoises and blue-footed boobies, and of course, Darwin's finches. I had a lot of students and other collaborators visit me while I was on my Fulbright scholarship, including some other CSU faculty. I got to meet the US ambassador to Ecuador and share my research with him. And of course, I brought my kids and my whole family. My kids were really little at the time. And so I'll share some of these experiences with you over the next few slides. But starting off, why did I apply? In particular, the Eastern Tropical Pacific is a really unique place for corals. It's an analog for what types of environments corals might experience under future climate change. Across the archipelago, there's really huge fluctuations in temperature, and the water in this area is acidic, similar to ocean acidification, which we are experiencing and are expected to see more of in the future. So I was interested in understanding, like, how is it that corals are able to survive in this really unique location? And there had been very little done on the physiology of corals in this area prior to my work there. In addition, I was interested in teaming up with an exchange partner that CSU-MB already had a relationship with. So when I was trying to figure out where I was going to go, I looked at programs that were specifically looking for researchers who wanted to do oceanography or marine science. In fact, I think I saw an email from Krista Kamer at Coast about some of the Fulbright scholarships that were specifically for marine scientists. And so that's one of the other reasons I chose Ecuador. And I, like all of us, was interested in having an abroad experience during my sabbatical, being immersed in a new culture, and to improve my language skills. So I'm an intermediate Spanish speaker, and I was interested in being in a place where I would get to hone those skills more. And of course, also it's the Galapagos. So many people have lots of reasons why they would want to visit, in addition to the specific research interests that I had. So what was my timeline for this application? So it was pretty far in advance that I started thinking about this opportunity, about 1.5 years, actually, because I wanted to bring my entire family and apply for sabbatical. It really took a lot of planning to kind of figure out how to put all these pieces together. So leading up to the application, I met with the International Programs Office at CSU-MB, and I got put in touch with the Dean of Research at the university that I was interested in working with. And through conversations over Zoom with the Dean, I was put in touch with faculty members in the biology department that may have similar interests as me. And that's how I met my collaborator, Margarita Brandt. And together we developed the research project that I eventually included for my proposal. But because I was going to need to travel a lot while I was in the Galapagos, I also needed to put together several research grants, because the Fulbright doesn't cover research costs. It really just covers a stipend for you and travel for you to get to wherever it is that you're going to be. So I applied for a National Geographic Society grant, as well as an internal grant. And for the work I was doing, we also needed to apply for permits about 1 year in advance. So there was a lot of legwork that I was doing leading up to the application. In addition, I had to plan this alongside my sabbatical leave. I also looked into different options as to whether or not I was going to get the Fulbright or not. So I looked into the difference of pay leave. I also applied for a 1-year sabbatical, which, given that it's only half pay, I was able to supplement with the funds from the Fulbright. So it allowed me to take a whole year. I also took an intermediate Spanish course leading up to my Fulbright. Although Spanish was not required for my Fulbright, the language requirement is a real thing for many countries. It did help. I think I had a letter from my Spanish teacher, saying what my level of Spanish was. I also had a letter from the research dean at USFQ in support of my application. And like I said, there were just lots of family logistics. At the time, my kids were ages 3 and 5. So figuring out how to get them there, as well as my husband, who is also a marine scientist. He applied for a Fulbright at the same time that I did to Ecuador. So we had individual proposals going into this, knowing that even if just one of us were to get the Fulbright, we would still be able to go. So what did I do on my Fulbright? I spent a lot of time underwater, collecting corals and doing thermal tolerance assays on corals at 7 different islands around the archipelago. You can see here, this is the thermal stress system that I brought with me. We were able to set it up on boats and in the laboratory where I was based at the USFQ Galapagos Science Center. I also co-taught a marine ecology course with my collaborator. And in this course, I proposed to include a CURE, or a course-based undergraduate research experience. So the students actually got to participate in some of the research and do some of the experiments with us as part of this course, which was really exciting. I also gave lots of seminars while I was there and presented at various outreach events. And I got to share my research with the US ambassador to Ecuador, who just happened to come to the lab while I was there. And it was really exciting to get to meet him and talk about my research experience with him. Professionally, had a huge impact. This is my collaborator. We became very good friends, and we still are working on the project and writing grants together. Through this work, we were able to, for the first time, uncover the Galapagos thermal tolerance limits. We brought samples back to CSU-WATER, and those are being used by many of my students. And so we developed this really long-term international collaboration, and we're writing proposals for me to come back and to continue this work in the future. And as some of the other speakers mentioned, your Fulbright experience will result in many research projects, from seminars to conference talks, pending publications that I have in the works, external proposals, and of course, new collaborators. And the personal impact for me was really huge. Like I said, my kids were really young when we embarked upon this journey. They attended local schools. They were completely immersed in Spanish, and they were young enough that they were able to pick up Spanish pretty well by the end of the 6 months that we were there. We were immersed in a new culture and language, and made lasting friendships with folks at the lab, and through children and families that our kids met while they were there. And I think together, all of this helped us to increase our cultural awareness back home, what it's like for people that are coming and visiting here from other countries as well. And then finally, the institutional impact here at CSU-WATER. I've been able to support other faculty and students who are applying for Fulbright applications. As I mentioned before, we have this ongoing research collaboration with USFQ, and they have an international exchange program for students. So we've had CSU-WATER students be a part of that program, which is also the program that I co-taught the marine ecology course with. And while I was in the Galapagos, there were 4 different CSU faculty that visited me, including 2 from my own department here at CSU-WATER. One of them is shown here. I also had 2 students visit me and assist with the research, alongside my collaborator and many of the other Ecuadorian students that assisted with the project overall. And so in general, all of these activities have helped contribute to achieving some of our international institutional goals here at CSU-WATER. So I have so much more that I could talk about, but I will end it here, and I'm happy to take any questions that anyone has about my specific research experience and teaching experience as a Fulbright scholar, or any other questions that you have. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cheryl. All right, so we are going to go to the Q&A session. We have a lot of questions lined up. I want to thank everyone in the audience for showing up and asking questions and being engaged. So we do have a lot of questions, so I'm going to ask our panelists to respond to them, and so that we can get through a lot of them, try to be efficient in your answers. I'll put it that way. So one of the first things I do think you guys covered, but maybe one or two of you could really point to this succinctly, is could you speak about what the Fulbright offers that other opportunities for either paid sabbatical or potential funded international collaborations do not? Does anyone want to speak to that? Like, what is unique maybe about Fulbright?
Pay for your kids' school, depending on the country, pay for your kids' school, pay for language lessons. The others maybe have something like you don't see that.
Yeah, I also had a lot of support from the Fulbright office in Ecuador. So when I had any issues, they were there to help me out. And they helped me make connections that I don't think I would have had the ability to do on my own necessarily when I was in country.
Anything else?
And
That
I
infrastructure
also,
there.
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I did get a lot of support from my campus. The administrators were very helpful once they learned about the Fulbright grant. I had completed my sabbatical, but they actually gave me the option to go on a partial leave of absence, which was really helpful.
Jamie, did you want to add anything?
No, I think everybody covered it. It was just that infrastructure and support system, I think, in the transition and getting acclimated to the new country.
There's a couple of very specific questions I'm going to have people address. Maybe Jamie might be one of the best person. They're kind of about program requirements. And then I'm going to curate some of the questions into something more general, a lot of which you guys have touched on, but we could summarize. So if a person has had a Fulbright as a grad student, can they apply for a Fulbright to the same country when they're a faculty member? You can answer that, but I know that part of it is that with a Fulbright, you want to maybe have some familiarity with the country, but not too much experience.
Right.
Either. So
yeah, like Steve mentioned, the Goldilocks effect, right? And which is true. And I believe you can still apply to that country. I mean, there's people who go, I've been a reviewer too for Fulbright, and there's people who have multiple Fulbrights at the same country. So it's doable.
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Before we go on to some of the more general questions, one person would like to know more about the travel grants. Could you guys, anyone who had a travel grant, or talk a little bit more about that aspect of it?
Yeah, so mine was it was a Middle East, North African regional travel grant. So the grant covered up to, I think it was 2 weeks at another North African or Middle Eastern country. And I felt like I was kind of doing a mini Fulbright again, because I thought it was a great opportunity and didn't really know anybody personally at any of the other countries, but I knew of one professor's work in Morocco. And so I was like, I'll just reach out and see if she's, would be happy to host me. And it went from there and applied. And again, it paid for, it paid for the travel, it paid for staying there, and supported me while I was at that country.
Thank you. Anyone else want to comment on the travel grants? Steve, I don't remember if you had one.
Jamie, that sounds familiar, but that's within the Fulbright. I'm not sure if the question is about. It's probably external to the Fulbright, and I'm not familiar with Fulbright travel grants separate from Fulbright Scholar.
I guess.
Yeah,
I
so
felt
it's with-
within it.
But yeah, it's within it. Once you, okay, and I think all the regions have some kind of regional travel grant. So once you receive your Fulbright and you end up in whatever country you're at, and that region has one, you'll receive an advertisement for that grant. So it's once you have the Fulbright, and it allows you to kind of expand on the locations that you have during the grant.
Yeah, I went to China for a week while I was in Thailand. What a culture shock. And then I realized I can't speak to the cab drivers in Thai. That didn't go very far.
Thank you. Okay, so one of the really big themes coming up in the questions is about Fulbrights coinciding with sabbaticals or not necessarily coinciding with sabbaticals. I know, Written, you said you took a partial leave. There's also questions about the pay. So I'm sure you all have something to say about this. We'll let you each speak. I'm going to start with Jamie a little bit from your perspective as the ambassador, and then we'll get to all of you. But anything you'd like to say about that?
Well, I think that's a theme that's come up several times. It's to coincide with the sabbatical is really tricky, and there's a lot of nuances to it, because you apply for your, they don't necessarily coincide in time, and you don't know when you received it and so forth, and so and then meanwhile you're applying for a sabbatical. And so, like, for my sabbatical application, I had, and I think Steve had the same thing. It was like a plan A and a plan B, where I was like, if I get this Fulbright, I am doing blah, 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 blah. If I don't, this is what I'm doing. And so that's how I built that. And so there was another aspect to the question, right? There was
about pay as well. I mean, the timing of it. Well, so there's the timing of it. How do you do a Fulbright if it doesn't coincide with a sabbatical? What are some mechanisms for leaving your institution for a while? And then I don't know how much Fulbright pays, and I think Steve, right, you had mentioned that if you got a Fulbright, you were going to be gone for a year or two terms with full pay. But if you hadn't gotten it, you would have done one term.
Yeah, so the rationale there between the housing and your stipend, we lived in Bangkok, the most expensive part of the country, easily. And get this, another twist to it was we rented our house out to an incoming faculty member in my department. And so between all those things, the half pay I had from the full year sabbatical, we just banked that. So that was another creative, like, kind of external part of it.
So you were on a full year sabbatical.
Yeah,
Written,
so you
did
get half.
say you had not done this in conjunction with your sabbatical? You'd done it differently? Written, was that correct?
the what?
Sorry, I'm asking Written. If Written, didn't you say you took a partial leave?
Yeah, what happened was when I got my Fulbright award, we were in the middle of the COVID pandemic. So I exhausted my 1-year sabbatical leave, and then the program got postponed by a year because everything was shut down. So when I approached my administrators, I asked them if it was still possible for me to, go on my grant and do this work. They were very supportive. They offered me partial leave of absence. So I taught one course virtually from Asia, and I still had my full benefits in place. It worked out really well.
One point on that too, and this is from the I chaired our college personnel committee for a couple of years, and having been on both sides. So if you come up with a Fulbright proposal saying that's part of your sabbatical, and if you get the Fulbright proposal, like Redin said, your college and your university, that's a big hammer. They will work with you then, because you have this big, full house that you're holding, and they will work with you to make that work. So it makes everybody look good. Is that your experience?
Very much so.
And I'll chime in with my experience as well. So the pay that you're given in country, at least in our case, was more than enough to rent out a place. There was also a stipend for our kids, so that helped pay for daycare and things like that. I had a lot of different options as well. So whether or not I got the Fulbright or the National Geographic Society grant that I applied for, I was willing to do either sabbatical or difference in pay leave, which is easier to get if necessary. And then, as I mentioned, my husband had also applied for a Fulbright. So if one of us had gotten it financially, we would have been able to make it work, even if I only had the sabbatical and not the Fulbright. Fortunately, it all worked out and we both got Fulbrights, which was pretty incredible. And so we also did the same thing where when we left, because we were gone for a 6-month period, we were able to rent out our house here in Monterey. So financially, everything worked out really well.
Yeah, I just want to point out, a lot of it, like when I look back at like the process there, everything has to like come together. There's, as Cheryl just pointed out, and I think everybody else can attest to, you've got your house at home. You've got, if you're bringing kids, you got the school. There's a lot of moving parts. And so that's why I really highlight like giving yourself enough time and also talking to a lot of people. And getting back to the pay part, it's what you get paid is variable across country. Also, how long you can have the Fulbright is variable. So for example, with Israel, you could just do a semester. But I was like, how many times am I going to ever do this? And so we were like, let's just extend our stay there for as long as we can pull it off financially. And so that's what ended up turning it into that year-long experience. But the actual funding from the Fulbright was really for just a semester. And there was no like language or funding for kids or anything like that. I think for families, you get a little bit of a bigger stipend. Yeah, it's incredibly variable across countries, and that's something you might want to take into consideration when considering where you want to go and for how long.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing I want to go back and summarize that's coming up a lot in the questions, and I know a lot of you did cover this, but we could kind of go over it. A lot of people have questions about finding the hosts. At what point in time you start reaching out to them? Is it before you apply? Is it while you're applying? As well as questions about, and I think part of this got answered, and I had put it in one of the responses to an answered question, but what are the criteria for being a host? And I think one of the things I think I saw in the chat was that the country maybe has to be listed as a host with the US State Department. So there's a list of countries that can host Fulbright scholars, correct? And if the country's not on that list, it's not a possibility. Okay. But could you talk about working with collaborators as well as the strengths or weaknesses of having someone host you with whom you've already collaborated?
I can start this one. So the applications again are due in September, and I think it was at least 6 months ahead of time that I started considering, reaching out to specific hosts. I did work with the International Programs Office here at CSU-MB at the time. The director was very familiar with the Fulbright program and knew a lot of our sister institutions around the world. And so she connected me with the research dean at the institution, and then kind of helped me find appropriate collaborators. And so then I had many Zoom conversations and multiple email exchanges back and forth in the months leading up to the deadline. In my case, I did not have a pre-existing collaborator, though. This was totally a part of the Fulbright process for me. And so yeah, I would say, multiple months in advance is when you want to start trying to make those connections. And then I think maybe it wasn't a requirement for everyone, but for my program, it was a requirement to have a letter from the host institution, basically inviting me and explaining what they were excited about having me there for, as well as what they wanted me to contribute to the university.
If I may, I'd echo Cheryl's point in that your international offices on your campuses are great resources. There are two ways that one can look at this. If you have a collaborator already in another country, that's great. If you don't, and if you're not even sure which country you want to go to, you're throwing a dart out there on the map. Doesn't matter which way you look at it, the international office would be a great resource. They most likely would have a bilateral exchange program that's already going on in that university, and they would be able to connect you to the international office in that campus, which then can set the ball rolling for you. And these are wonderful resources to have on doing this.
On the other hand, I have a friend, academic friend in a different college. He's applying for Japan, and you apply for the country and they assign you a university. I was floored. I could not believe that. How does that work? It's like arranged relationship. And on the other hand, between mine, I was already working in Thailand. So on one of my trips, I kind of shopped around, like, do you need what I do or something like that? Could I live here? And then the Germany thing came up through some CSU-IP and research office event I attended and some introductions there. But I think the networking thing, that's no joke. And so some of us, you belong to some society and you go to conferences that are somewhat international, like 10, 20% apply, like Jamie, you shake like ESA, right? And start talking to the people who don't speak American, accent. Find them, make friends with them, and they're already internationally engaged because they came to US or Canada for the conference. So those are fantastic potential links.
And Ritten, didn't you say that you had a letter from your host, but it was optional in your case, whereas in Cheryl's it was required, I guess?
That's correct, Krista. So India does not require any letter of invitation. So, but I still requested my host to get me one. And yeah, it really helped my application in my mind. And also I wanted to add, I know someone who had applied, who wanted to go to Japan and had written to about 3 or 4 different scientists there, and he never heard back from them. So he reached out to me and I told him to continue connecting with other professionals in the field. And he was successful in getting a response from one of them, and he applied and he got the grant. So yeah.
I want to go back. In the beginning of my talk, I kind of alluded to, I did a research and teaching, and there's really 3, when you're thinking about the at least with the Fulbright Scholar Award, you can do, there's like the just research, there's the kind of the hybrid research teaching, which I did, and then there's also teaching. And so don't feel obligated to feel like, oh, it's got to be just this research. Maybe a teaching one. I mean, we are, right, PUIs, and we teach. And it's really a great opportunity also to, experience other cultures and other departments through teaching. And just to add to that, I'm not sure. I know it might be a different dynamic though with getting a host. You might want to, in like teaching, you might want to reach out to department chairs, or if you know somebody in a university, you might want to again try to target them. But it was an incredible experience, and I taught. It was all PhD students in this class, and of course here at the CSU, I hadn't taught PhDs, and it was just a fabulous experience.
Yeah, I just wanted to also add that if you do include a teaching component to your application, that you will be asked to include a syllabus for that course. And so that is something that I had to co-develop with my collaborator in advance. So just know that that's going to be an added piece of the application.
Yeah.
And I want to add that teaching doesn't mean that you are teaching a regular course. You can actually do a series of seminars. So let's say if you are, there for 5 months, you can do, monthly seminars, and that would be considered teaching.
Steve.
It's very mutually rewarding to help PhD students, like even officially be in their committee. For example, in Thailand, certain fellowship recipients, they're required to have a non-Thai person on their committee. They actually pay you to be on the committee. There's this, you get a check. I don't know. We should have that here, right? Everybody. So that's very, to learn from their emerging scientists and developing scientists. You learn a heck of a lot from them.
Thank you. Jamie, since we're on the topic of research, teaching, or hybrid, when we prepped for this, I think you would also mention that there are shorter term scholarships. Could you mention that?
Yeah. There was now I forget the name, the Fulbright specialist program, and you can upload your specialties through the site for that program. And there's shorter ones, I think a couple weeks or so, where you can go teach a class somewhere, and anywhere from a couple weeks up to a month or so. So there's shorter term ones too that are less intensive in terms of the proposal. I don't think there's much of a proposal in that regard. Yeah, so that's an optional program to check out.
I've also had colleagues do 3-month summer Fulbright scholarships where they don't have to worry about like pulling kids out of school or anything. But I think it's country specific. In that case, one was to Russia and one was to the Azores.
I got a question, Jamie. Last I saw, and this was between my Thailand and Germany one, you're only allowed 2 of the traditional Fulbright scholars in your life. Now, there are other ones. I have a colleague in physics here at Fresno State. He seems to make his living off Fulbright, but do you know what I mean? There's you talked about specialists, and then there's
a distinguished scholar program.
So Jamie, do you know? I mean, I just heard the traditional one, you only get 2 in your life, so choose carefully, but there's other things out there, and they vary by country though, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so there's a number, there's like some very specialized one, like there was the Arctic one, and there's like a specific to policy programs.
Those don't count. I know a friend applied to one, cancer research in Finland. That's not counting against your standard one, right?
I don't think so. And I actually haven't heard that 2-limit rule.
Yeah, I kind of got, okay, I gotta be careful. But it's all been good.
Let me ask a question then that was in the chat, which was, does a Fulbright application need to focus on a research project, or can it focus on a practice-based project instead, for example, learning more about the public health system in another country?
Yeah, on the review side, if I'm looking at that, it's not like you to go in a library and read about that, for example. You have to live in that, immerse in that, and be able to bring it back to some benefit here. Let's say energy and water technologies. There's a lot going on in the world that, believe it or not, people in California, we're not good at, but other places are. If you go immerse in that, bring it back, that's huge. Practical, applied, and scientific, or whatever your discipline is, that would be a win-win-win in a proposal, I think. Jamie, do you see the same way?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. And there's one specific to, and there's even, administrators can do a Fulbright, so they have administrative programs and policy programs. So there's a lot. Once you start exploring, like really the diversity of the different kinds of awards, I mean, it's pretty expansive.
And can I, given our audience, CSU-WATER and CSU Coast, people, please go to other parts of the world to help solve California water problems. Can I not say that enough? Right, Krista?
Yeah.
Please share that with us. That would be a major thing for the chancellor's office, right? Shankar, they would, oh my gosh, that would be huge for everybody. So go back to Israel, Jamie, go to Chile, go to Saudi Arabia, desalinization leaders of the world, for example.
So I want to ask this, Steve, you said you've served on a number of review panels. Do you generally only serve on a Fulbright review panel after you've been a scholar?
That was my experience because my first one was really early. I was just tenured. But you know, like if you get an NSF or you publish in some journal, hey friend, would you please review for us?
Well, I'm curious because a lot of times with NSF, the advice is maybe get yourself on a review panel before you actually apply and get an award in order to learn more about the program. But I didn't know if Fulbright tends to maybe choose reviewer.
I don't know, Jamie, I was in my fourth year when I did my, so I didn't know of that opportunity.
The opportunity for
To be a reviewer. I don't see how you could be a Fulbright reviewer without having experience and gone through the process, honestly. That would be,
I was asked.
Everyone talked about the practical parts, like Cheryl, like your kids and everything. You got to live it before you can evaluate that, right?
Yeah, I was asked after I returned to do that, and you know, and then there's the informal interactions, right? I've heard it from several of the other panelists that helping other faculty on the campus, looking at their proposals, sharing proposals, I think is really really a great advantage here with the, you know, the bulk of the CSU and all this collected knowledge
I'll go on a limb and offer for CSU-WATER, because I can, a reviewer network of CSU-WATER. So let me know, let us know if you have a proposal or ideas you want to run by, and we can network it in CSU-WATER.
Also, would your international programs director at your campus usually know about anyone from that campus who had been a Fulbright?
They should. Yeah, they should. I'm trying to find out.
There's a database anyone can search. Yeah.
The only database that I found was the IIE database, which is where I got my data. But I think campuses do collect that. And in fact, next week I have a system-wide meeting here in the Chancellor's office of the international, senior international officers, the people who are in charge on your campus. And this was something that I am going to bring up so that we can have some feedback on that. But as you start looking at this, and clearly the information that's presented here, it could be daunting for faculty, but I want to plug in for the students as well, because the students might find this even more daunting. You in your position can help those students in their process of application as well. And this could be sort of a mutually enriching for anybody who's listening here in this webinar to help your students, because it's just that little push that needs to be given, which is what we do to get them to study abroad. And it's that additional little push that you need to give to get them to do this Fulbright, because once they get on that, they're just, it has its own momentum. So please do that as well.
Thank you.
I just forgot what I was going to ask. Oh, but so, I'm sorry, I was going to say, so that you're, because you guys were stressing how important it can be, like how you're all willing to help someone craft their application for the first time. So to anyone who's here thinking about applying, perhaps you could use your international programs office on your campus to help you identify someone at your campus that you might be able to talk to. I know you mentioned the database, Steve, but I wasn't sure that it was always 100% up to date.
True, because one of our people on campus that works in Fulbright, she showed me where she got the data. Shankar, it sounds like that's what you did. And
yes,
they had my name misspelled and like transposed in the country, kind of weird, but I don't know. The quality control.
So just talk to your international programs office. That might be.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
So one other, and we have a couple of minutes left, but one other question, especially maybe for Jamie, was about the timeline. So if the call is going to come out in February 2023, they're due in September 2023. When would you then take that scholarship? Is it 12 months after that, or is it kind of up to you?
Yeah, so so if you apply in September, like I learned of mine in the following March.
Mhm.
Okay,
And
6
so,
months later is when you
right,
find out.
yeah. And then I didn't hear about my sabbatical until I think it was May. So I was kind of like, and I was ready to, do it with or without the university support. So, and then you would, and again, the semesters and kind of the timing is country by country and sometimes even university by university basis. So that part is tricky, but like we left in the following September. Actually, it was like around this time in 2017 that we left. So that's kind of the timing of when you hear about these awards. And so, but in the preparation up to this, I mean, if you're seriously thinking about it, I would really start right after this webinar to think about it and get things moving.
Yeah, and in my case, so I applied September, found out in March, but we didn't leave until the second semester of the academic year, and so I didn't leave until January, so almost a year and a half from when I applied.
Thank you. So we are about to wrap up. I'm going to ask our 4 panelists and Shankar to briefly give us, one last piece of advice or thought you would have for anyone here today who's thinking about applying. So, I don't know, Cheryl, sorry, pick on you first.
Yeah,
what is
sure.
one thing you would tell people listening before we go?
Yeah, start early, start very early. If you can begin the process, at least like 4 to 5 months in advance, it's going to make everything easier. There's a lot of pieces. You may have to do a language requirement test, and it takes time to set that up. Getting the letter of invitation, figuring out what you're going to do. It's not something that you can do at the last minute. So start early.
Written, I'll go to you.
So you can apply to only one program in only one country at a given time. So it is very important to do the research and make sure that you are applying to the right place.
Jamie.
I have to follow those. Those are, yeah. Also know that there's support. I know me, and I'm sure the other panelists, everybody here, are willing to help. And so use the experiences of others in, as you go down this road, if you do indeed decide to apply for this.
And Steve.
Well, stick with the networking theme. Unabashedly network through your channels, like your scientific societies, and then CSU-WATER and COAST. Like we have social media, Twitter could get with that. And then while you're networking, be excited about what you want to do. If you're not excited about it, no one else would be. That's very important. Don't underestimate that. And then I want to thank Jamie so much for getting this rolling and coming up with this idea. Thanks, Jamie. It wouldn't happen without your impetus there.
Thank you. Thanks
you.
Again, both of you and Krista and your staff for making this happen.
Well, I want to give Shankar a chance to give us his closing thought.
It's scary to give me the last word, but no, I think it's, being an internationalist, I feel like these are programs that you need to apply because the benefit that you bring to campus is immense. But also don't forget that the benefit that you bring to the host country and the host institution is also immense. They don't get these kinds of opportunities to have very high quality CSU faculty coming out there and interacting with them. So please do that and continue to work with your international office. They are a great resource on your campus as well. Thank you again.
Well, thank you to all of our panelists for being here today. Thank you to everyone who attended. We will send out an email to everyone who registered with information on how to access the slides and the video, and we'll also post those at least on the COAST website and maybe on the WATER, or we'll direct from one website to the other, but that way you can share this information with anyone who couldn't make it today that you think might be interested. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Hope everyone has a great weekend.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.